Hello, my name is Anthony.
My name is Abraham.
I'm Emily.
Today we're going to talk to you about foreign aid to Africa. I will talk about the United States government, national nonprofit groups that send the aid. Abraham will talk about the local governments in Africa, and then Emily will talk about the communities and families themselves. Information and sources were relatively scarce. However, we found the information we needed. We initially thought for increasing aid to Africa, but after the information we found, it became apparent that our aid isn't helping the situation. We need to look for alternative ways to give aid, like food. This is not without its own problems. In the end, it would be beneficial for the United States and Africa if we're able to boost their economy and slowly decrease their dependence on aid. Africa is a starving continent. According to Hunger Notes, an online publication of World Hunger Education Service, 4% of sub-Saharan Africa lived on $1.25 a day in 2008. That barely buys 3 apples here in the United States. People are severely malnourished. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization estimated that 239 million people in sub-Saharan Africa were malnourished by 2010. The United States donates some of its aid to help buy food, and people are cautious to send food directly to the communities because it can harm the local farmers. However, sending food works better than money. For our service, we donated food through a website called freerice.com. Emily will talk more about our service later. Tackling hunger is necessary because it is the root problem. Many of the malnourished people live in the part of Africa that is susceptible to malaria. According to World Health Organization, 627,000 people die every year from malaria. 564,300 of these deaths are in Africa, about 90% of the total deaths worldwide. This disease is highly treatable, but many cannot get access to a pill that could save their life. The common anti-malaria pill, like chloroquine, costs only a few cents, according to UNICEF, which means it would have cost approximately $16,929 just to save their lives. The challenge to this is that the common anti-malaria pills are losing their effectiveness. There are other drugs that can be used, but they cost upwards of $2.50 per pill. This raises the cost to $1.4 million. The United States sent $31.2 billion in aid to other countries in 2012. That means it would have taken 0.04% of the total aid to have saved those 500,000 lives. That didn't happen. The question is not if our aid is helping these countries, but where is it going, and is it being used effectively? The United States sends aid to numerous foreign countries every year. This is done through the government and national nonprofit groups. Like I said before, the government gave $31.2 billion in 2012 and $37 billion in 2013. About 41% of this aid is military assistance, so approximately $23 billion was given as economic aid. This includes food, supplies, and shelter, and etc. As for nonprofit aid, we give as much as $71.2 billion. This totals for $102.4 billion in aid to foreign countries. This seems like an enormous amount, but in reality, this is only 0.6% of the federal budget. On this link, it goes to the average food prices in June for U.S. itself. And if you average the male from 19 to 50 on the moderate plan and the female from 19 to 50 on the moderate plan as well, it comes about to $80 per person for a day, while Africa is living at $1.50. With all this money going overseas, especially to countries in Africa, shouldn't the situation be improving? Shouldn't our foreign aid be decreasing instead of increasing? As for the malaria example before, total deaths from malaria in Africa has increased by 50% over the past 14 years. Over the course of 23 years, Africa's global hunger index has increased from 5.8 to a total score of 19.2. This number is a combination of child mortality rates, malnourished rates, and the rate of children under 5 who are underweight. On the scale provided, it dropped from an alarming rate, 20 to 25, to serious, 15 to 20. The overall decrease is about 30%. The cause is not an increasing poverty rate, but corruption. Corruption at the level of local government. It severely cripples the world's efforts to bring poverty in Africa to a minimum. An example of this corruption is Kibera, the largest slum in Africa. It is part of Nairobi, the capital of Kenya. 1 million people live in a space smaller than Central Park. For those not familiar with the size of Central Park, it is roughly 5 times the size of LMU. People live in tents and shacks with no running water and trash galore. But not 10 yards away sits a United Nations headquarters with millions in a yearly budget. Somewhere in the transfer of funds, there's a disconnect from the people who are actually giving the aid and the people who are supposed to get the help. Next is Abraham, who will discuss local governments.
So before we get to the local governments, I'd like to show you that foreign aid is not always completely useless. The African countries can look up to other countries who have developed successfully with the help of foreign aid, such as South Korea. South Korea was one of the poorest countries in the world after the Korean War in the mid-1900s. According to an article from The Guardian, with destruction across the peninsula and deaths of millions of people, with only $64 for the GDP, which is lower than the GDPs of current African countries, no one would have thought about the possibility of South Korea growing to its modern state in just 40 to 50 years. Currently, South Korea has grown to be the world's 12th largest economy and is a member of OECD, where developed countries are gathered to help other governments to become prosperous. Also, there are Korean companies such as Samsung and LG that became successful worldwide. Even though South Korea grew through its own development in the industrial sector, the development process would have been more difficult if it weren't for the massive amounts of foreign aid. And the US gave more than $60 billion to South Korea alone. But for African countries, there is a huge obstacle that is slowing down the development. Unlike South Korea, even with all the given foreign aid to the African countries, most countries are still not developing successfully. There is a reason why most African countries still struggle to escape poverty and other issues. There is a reason why most African countries remain underdeveloped, even with trillions of dollars in total given to them since the mid-1900s. One of the main reasons is because of the corruption of the local African government. With only few African countries, such as the Republic of South Africa, having a stable economy and being democratic, corruption is present in most parts of the African continent. According to an article from Forbes, there are a number of notoriously corrupt African leaders, and one example is the president of Angola, Jose Eduardo dos Santos. With massive exports of oil and diamond, the country of Angola is very rich with resources. However, while the majority of the population is living in poverty and with poor education system, the president of Angola and his family is living in extreme wealth. The president diverted state funds into his personal and family accounts, which most likely helped his daughter become the richest woman in Africa. Now, the African leaders are not the only ones who are corrupt. According to an article from Cato Institute, Nigerian state governors, police chief, and other government officials have been accused of relocating a total of billions of dollars into personal accounts in foreign banks. Even after the funds were recovered, majority of the funds were simply taken again. This unfortunate event is addressed by a professor at Princeton University in the following video.
Corruption is obviously a problem in a lot of countries, whether it's in Europe or in Africa, the United States where I am, and it's a source of great frustration. So I think building institutions to increase the transparency of government and to prevent what we call corruption is important. But to think that we can't try to address problems of inequality, which in the case of Southern Africa and most of Africa really means trying to lift up the bottom half of the population to a higher standard of living, has to wait for completely fully functioning government in which all transactions are done. Honestly, I don't think we can can think about staggering policies and practices. The situation is still very problematic, but I think that even in a country with a government that many rightly complain of way too much unacceptable corruption, there has still been a number of economic and social policies which have done quite a bit for people at the bottom. Some of the inequality that we see stems from people at the very top who are cronies of the state, who are receiving sweetheart deals, and in a democratic society, people shouldn't tolerate those, and those resources should be used for the entire population, not just for the few well-connected. But to respond to Josephine's question, I think we shouldn't let anger and frustration with corruption stall efforts to address the very possible social and economic policy opportunities that exist.
So now Emily will discuss about the affected communities in Africa.
So while all of this aid and help from foreign governments that is given to the communities in Africa may sound great, in reality the aid is not helpful to the communities because of the high level of corruption. The aid often does not even reach the communities in need and many argue that it would be more helpful to the communities if we cut off aid altogether. In fact, all the billions of dollars sent to Africa have only made the poor poorer and the governments more corrupt. Think about it. If all this aid we give to Africa was really working, why does more than 50% of the population, or 350 million people, still live on less than $1 a day? Clearly, just throwing money at these communities is not only not doing anything to solve their problems, but it's actually hindering their growth and affecting them in a negative way. The aid's lack of effectiveness is due to the fact that aid is not free and often doesn't reach the communities in need. Most people don't know that African countries usually pay around $20 billion a year in debt repayment. This money is taken from education and healthcare, which are two major problems in Africa today. Not only do they lose money in debt repayments, but also a lot of the money is taken from the people by the government. It has been estimated that Africa loses $150 billion every year to corrupt leaders. You might be surprised at how common these incidences of corruption actually are. The Wall Street Journal reports that in 2001, Malawi's former president, Bhekile Muluzi, was charged for embezzling $12 million in aid money. In addition to Zambia's former president, Frederick Chiluba, being charged for stealing millions of dollars from healthcare, education, and infrastructure for his own personal use. Obviously, it's a horrible situation that the government is taking money from the people, but the numbers are even more shocking when you learn that 70% of Africa's money comes from foreign sources. While that's the average for all of Africa, in some countries the numbers are much higher. When a country is this dependent on others for money, it is never a good situation, especially considering the money is doing little to solve the issues of disease, poverty, hunger, sanitation, and lack of education in Africa. Still, today, almost half of Africans live below the poverty line, according to the African Development Bank. David Karanja, a former member of the Kenyan Parliament, explains to the Cato Institute, "Foreign aid has done more to harm Africa than we care to admit. It has led to a situation where Africa has failed to set its own pace and direction of development, free of external interference. Today, Africa's development plans are drawn thousands of miles away in the corridors of the IMF and World Bank. What is sad is that the IMF and World Bank experts who draw these development plans are people completely out of touch with the local African reality. This creates negative effects within the communities that need help. With the high level of corruption in the country's governments, foreign monetary aid ends up hurting African communities by creating a dependency on foreign aid rather than growing their own economy. Now that the countries are so dependent on foreign aid, it has become impossible for them to grow their own economies and instead have to constantly get help from other countries in order to survive. The Cato Institute, a research organization in the United States, explains that between 1960 and 1997, so much money was given to countries in Africa that now the budgets of countries like Ghana and Uganda are more than 50% aid dependent. A clear example of the detrimental effects of this type of aid is in Tanzania. Over a period of 20 years, Scandinavia gave Tanzania more than $10 billion in aid. However, during the same amount of time, their economy decreased at 0.5% every year, and personal consumption declined by 43% on average. Now, around 36 million Tanzanians have to live on only $290 a year, which is much less than $1 a day. And it's one of the lowest annual per capita incomes in the world. It is apparent that all foreign aid does is hurt African countries and their people. Now that you're aware of what's really going on with the aid sent to Africa, you're probably wondering what we can do to help. Well, clearly just sending money across the Atlantic doesn't end up helping anybody, so the next best option is to send food, since one of the main issues in Africa is hunger. The food sent to poverty-stricken countries, like in Africa, actually reaches the communities in need because corruption regarding food is much less likely than corruption regarding money. However, there is still the possibility that it can be distributed in an unfair manner. According to reports done by the Freeman Online magazine, rulers occasionally will ration more of the food to the military than the people in need. While the system is not perfect, it is still more helpful than sending billions of dollars to countries where the leaders will steal most of it, if not all of it. In fact, in coming years, it may become necessary as agricultural conditions in Africa decline. The International Food Policy Research Institute claims that in the next decade, food production in Africa will fall to a fifth of the current production due to climate changes. While sending food to Africa may not be the final solution to the country's problems, it will allow the platform they need in order to become self-sufficient. This is an important change from sending money straight to Africa, which in the end just makes the country too dependent on others for survival. Sending food rather than money to countries in need is a step in the right direction in order to truly help the African people. Many of us have grown up seeing commercials on TV and articles in the newspaper telling us that we need to send money to Africa. But with these new developments proving that simply sending money doesn't solve any problems, many don't know what they can do to help. That is why our group used a service called freerice.com in order to donate rice to communities that have a lack of food. By answering simple questions in a variety of subjects, we were able to donate a total of 3,000 grains of rice to people in need, as you can see in this screenshot. The website is a collaboration with the World Food Program and helps kids learn while they help others. And you don't have to question whether or not the aid is really reaching the people who need it. The Canadian Department of Foreign Affairs and Development reviewed the humanitarian assistance and development effectiveness of the World Program. The report concluded that the World Food Program does a good job assessing the needs of the communities and following through with aid. So using freerice.com in connection with the World Food Program is an effective way to help. The basic concept behind the website is that it contains multiple choice flashcards in different subjects, from vocabulary to math and sciences, with levels ranging usually from 1 to 60. For every flashcard you answer correctly, 10 grains of rice are donated. As you answer more correctly, the levels get harder, but the website is geared more towards younger students, so at our age, the questions will never be too difficult. Because of this, freerice.com is an incredibly easy way for us to help starving children from across the globe. I know we're all college students, and a lot of us are too busy to have time to go and volunteer somewhere. But with this website, you can help a child in minutes. You can play the game on your phone while you're waiting for food in the cafeteria or when you need a study break on your computer. Even if you only take 10 minutes out of your day to answer a few simple questions, you could provide a starving child with a meal they wouldn't have otherwise. With such a simple way to help decrease the number of people starving in Africa, you have no excuse not to help. While we aren't able to help solve all the issues African communities face today, hunger is an important issue with an easy solution that is more effective than simply donating money. Donating money is essentially just a Band-Aid. Once it's gone, the problems are still there. By providing food to Africa, we are able to help them gain the momentum they need in order to start becoming self-sufficient.